Welcome back to the Content That Grows podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by Emily Kramer. And just to kind of quickly go over what we're going to be going over today, we're primarily going to be discussing improving your homepage and homepage conversion. So if you're not familiar with Emily, she is a fund manager and marketer. She's co-founder of MKT1 Capital, which is an early stage B2B fund. She writes the MKT1 newsletter, which has been growing in popularity a lot in the last 6 months. And she also teaches marketing leadership courses. Prior to all of this, Emily was a marketing executive who built the marketing teams from scratch at Asana, Carta, Ticketfly, which was acquired by Eventbrite, and Astro, which was acquired by Slack. How's it going, Emily? Welcome to the podcast.
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig in today. I think, the cool thing about this newsletter you wrote recently, in the last few months anyway, about how to create a more effective homepage, seemed to really resonate with a lot of people, really take off. I think you did a good job of distilling down, making some good visuals. I saw a lot shared across social, but I also feel like it just kind of hit on a topic that has become less interesting or something that people just don't talk about as much. So I feel like maybe just kind of hit found an opportunity, a void for a lot of people that they were wanting some information. So excited to kind of dig into that today. And I would love for you to just kind of start by giving an overview of sort of the core elements of that newsletter that you wrote.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that this is just it's not just on the content side. I think in general, there's not enough attention paid to people's website. Maybe they spend a whole bunch of money on them, getting them redesigned, or spend a bunch of money getting copywritten, but it often misses the mark. So I feel like there's just not the right amount of attention in the right ways is not placed on companies' websites. Like your website is I always say it's like your front door. Everybody, whether it's a candidate or a prospect or a customer, is like going to come to your or a partner is going to come to your website at some point in time. So it's kind of funny when people seem to spend more time on like sales enablement PDFs than their website. I mean, that's maybe an extreme example, but it's so important. Everyone is coming through here. Like get it right. And so the crux for or the reason for the newsletter, like pretty much all of my newsletters, come from the fact that I'm working with startups all day on building out their marketing function. And in doing this, it's like, what are the things that keep coming up, or what are the things that I sound like a broken record on and keep explaining? And I felt like I kept explaining, like, here's how you redo your homepage. It's not as complicated as you're making it out to be, but right now it's not working. So that was the impetus for this. And so I think the number one thing that we all see on websites is you look at the whole thing, and I'm talking early and growth stage startups here specifically. You look at the whole thing and you're like, I don't know what this company does. Like, I have absolutely no idea. And like, not only do I not know what this company does, like, I don't know who it's for. And if it's for me, I'm like not 100% sure that that's the case. And so like, what does it do? What does it do? How does it fit in? Is it for me? Why is it better? These things are missing. So there's a fundamental like messaging problem on the websites that I see. And I think if you improve the story and the site architecture and, the design, and actually kind of simplify, refine, make it better, you'll improve your conversion rates. And conversion rate can have a massive impact on your entire funnel. And I also feel like while websites are often forgotten about, conversion is often forgotten about by marketers. And a lot of people talk about it, but then when I actually talk to startups or talk to marketers and I say, what are your goals? Their goals are always drive this number of MQLs. And my comment is, at what conversion rate? I can drive up MQLs that don't convert at all down the funnel all day long, but you need to have kind of a conversion rate threshold there. So you want to be increasing web traffic, but you want to be maintaining or improving the conversion rate as well. And so a lot of times, like the most low-hanging fruit for people is just, you'll get a lot more things down to the, down the funnel if you just improve that website conversion rate. So, and then what I kind of cover is, how to make a simple messaging guide. there's so much out there in positioning and messaging, but a lot of it's really abstract and doesn't result in like usable copy on a website. So how do you break this down really simply and have a very simple messaging framework that you can then place on your homepage? I also break down in this newsletter, what are the standard sections you need on your homepage? Like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Like, you need the same sort of simple set of sections, nothing too fancy that's going to match up with the messaging guidelines that you've made. And then, from there, you need to do some things on the technical side to make sure that people can get to your website, and when they get there, they convert. So everything from building out sort of landing pages to making sure your site is optimized for SEO, to making sure your forms work and all of those things as well. So, yeah, that's what it covers, and I'm happy to dive into any of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first part is that I'd love to go a bit deeper is what I really loved was that while you did include some stuff around kind of wireframe and, here's some core elements that you can include in the homepage, you didn't jump right into here's the ultimate wireframe. It was, let's start with the messaging guide. And I think that was like really, really critical because I do think that a lot of companies start with the design or the layout.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of curious, like, why do you think that is, that companies want to gravitate that way versus working to get the messaging right in the first place, and just generally why you think that's important and why you started with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what tends to happen is that companies do work on positioning and messaging, and they will go out and maybe even outsource some of that, or they'll work on it and then they'll be like, what I got back isn't usable, or like, I don't know how to even take this guide, which is sometimes many, many pages, and actually apply it to anything that I'm doing. So there's like this gap between what was made and is it usable? So I think it's like, how do I connect the dots here? So I always tell people when they're doing anything in marketing, like, you have to start with by understanding your audience. You have to understand your business model and your go-to-market motion, and those things are going to have a huge impact on what you're doing. And then you have to nail down some of these foundational pieces, like, what is your basic story? And it doesn't need to be 500 pages. You really need to cover, like, what problem do you solve? What exactly is your product? Who is it for? And why is it better? And you need to start there. And that really easily maps to your website. So I guess I kind of think about starting any sort of, tactical advice on anything. I think about starting in one of those places. Like, you got to have sort of these foundational pieces first. And as far as like design versus copy, which comes first? I mean, the answer is it's always going to be a back and forth. Like, if you do the messaging and copy first, then then the design happens and it doesn't quite fit in, and then you might have to adapt it a little. It is sort of a back and forth and an iterative approach. But in order to plan out what sections you need, you kind of have to know the copy and sort of content in advance of doing that initial design. So it's not really you can start in either place. Like, you really do need to start with what is going to go on here and go from there.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, I agree. And going back to the one of the other points you made around like the testing and like conversion rate and some of that, kind of like a two-part thing here that I'm curious from your perspective, and then I'll kind of share some of my thoughts from my experience as well. But the like iterating versus waiting and then making a big change.
Yep.
And then also like the early stage, like let's just start with that. Like I'll break it into two. So first, kind of how do you typically advise people on? Okay, you follow this framework, you did the messaging, you laid out the homepage, you did it. Do you advocate for iterating on all of that, or do you typically lean towards like give it more time, let it run for 6-9 months, and then do a bigger like sweeping change of a bunch of stuff.
I think your marketing website should be your source of truth. I think that means it needs to be updated with your latest messaging, with your, the personas you're targeting, with all of these things as frequently as those changes happen. And I think what happens is a lot of times that's not the case, and that's because marketing doesn't control the website, or it's not built on something like Webflow, and so marketers can't make those changes. So I think, marketing has to own the website. Like this isn't a, I used to be a marketing lead, I'm like land grabbing. That's not what it is at all. It's like marketing needs to own it because they need to be making changes all the time so that it is the source of truth and so that it converts. And it's a living, breathing thing. Now, all that said, you might make some incremental improvements over time, and maybe a lot of those are to copy and content. Maybe that's adding in some new sections or adding in some new pages and then rerouting. And eventually your website, becomes Frankenstein together and doesn't flow well and kind of needs a restart. And so there are times when I think you take the iterative approach, and then there are times when you say, like, we've iterated on this so much, it needs a fresh start. And so I think and whether that fresh start means like literally starting again on design, or whether it just means like, let's just go back through this whole thing, re-put it back in like a very logical structure, and like go through the whole copy and messaging again and making sure it's telling the right story. Like it can take different forms. But the key things to point out here is like your website should be built on a platform that marketers can easily update. The most common way to do that right now is Webflow. Some people still use WordPress. Some people are using Kramer, which is a newer tool and also happens to rhyme with my last name, Kramer. Just pointing that out. Whenever I say Framer, it's like kind of hard to say because I want to say Kramer. It's totally. A personal problem. Unique to me and a few others in the world with the last name. But, those are the tools most people are using. And still some companies I see will have custom built things or built things on a headless CMS. And that, tends to be the engineer's preference early on when they're building a website. But you've got to switch it over to being for marketing to be able to do this. And then, as I was saying on the other stuff, you want to iterate on it, make sure it's your source of truth. And then lastly, when it lacks flow, you got to kind of do a reset. And so that's how I think about all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think I agree that you can't get to that point where there are enough things that are disconnected and just like need a bit of a broader sweep, and it does warrant the full redesign. But I think outside of that, I've likened it in the past to kind of like when you're managing people and like giving feedback, you don't want to just like be like, well, we're doing performance reviews in 6 months. I'll save it for that. Like you want to do it now, because if you wait, then you like have all this stuff that kind of comes out in 6 months and it's a bigger deal and a bigger mess. But if you could be giving feedback now, doing that along the way, it's iterative, it makes improvements over time. Similarly, there's a lot of things that you shouldn't tee it up because at some point you're going to do a redesign. Go ahead and make the copy change or add the section.
Yes.
And benefit from it now, learn from it now, like all of that.
And if it's not...
go ahead,
sorry to interrupt, but like if it's not a fast enough process for you to be able to iterate on it, then maybe you do need to do that redesign sooner for the purpose of getting it into into something like Webflow that you can easily change. So like, if you're like, I can't make this incremental update fast enough, so I'm just going to wait for the redesign. It's like, okay, well, maybe you need to pull that up. Like, marketing being unable to update the website easily is almost reason enough for, a reset on the website.
Yeah. And I think you see that. Like, it's fair, like you said, like early on, there's engineer preference for headless CMS or whatever it may be. But I think a lot of times it does get to that point where there's a realization like, hey, we have a team in-house. They're capable of managing themselves. We need to like make this change and enable them. Mm-hmm. The second part of my earlier question that I split into two, to build on that, is I think a lot of early stage companies get tied up on they don't want to change it because they don't know if it's going to affect performance.
Yeah.
And so they want to test. Like some people start testing very early, and they're like, well, we got to test it, even if it's like, well, shoot, you're going to be 6 months in before you get statistical
Enough web
significance
traffic.
on this. Like,
Yeah.
just make the change.
Just make the change.
So like, how do you talk to people about when to just be iterative and make the change? Because, hey, look, you're getting, 8 demo requests a month. Like, there's no point in trying to test this. Like, when do you be iterative, and when do you start to implement some of the rigor of testing and actually like getting more scientific about it?
Yeah, I mean, look, like early on, when you don't have very much traffic, when you have like, single digit thousands of visitors a month, like you can't A/B test. I mean, it's just not worth it. Like, you got to go on hunch. In my opinion, like it's just not going to be worth it. Like, it's going to take you forever to get there. And go on hunch, and if, you start to notice a big change in what's happening, then like go back to it. And I know that's not a perfect A/B test because it's different times and different cohorts of people, but like you can't worry about it then. And so, yeah, I think people are like, I need to A/B test everything, or maybe people come from larger companies where that's possible and easy. I mean, we could do rapid fire A/B tests on the Asana homepage, like when I was leaving there, like rapid fire, like in less than a day in some cases, because we got so much traffic and that's awesome. But I think when people then go to early stage companies where they don't have it, they're like, I should A/B test this. And it's like, some of this you got to go on like what's going to better tell your story, what's going to more clearly tell your story. And your A/B tests are actually conversations with customers that either you're having, founders are having, or sales is having with customers on what's resonating. And so like that's your testing, are these conversations. It's anecdotal. And so you're taking that anecdotal feedback and you're applying it, and you're, trusting your gut a little bit. And when you get up to a decent amount of traffic, then you can A/B test things.
Yep. Great.
Yeah.
And then, last piece, I think, around kind of the homepage stuff is, I think that your, the layout, sort of the wireframe, kind of all the elements that you walk through, I think made a ton of sense and cover it. And I think for a lot of early stage companies, can kind of function as the website.
Yes.
Like it does a good job of like the full overview. So for very early stage companies, in both of what you and I do, we certainly work with a lot of teams that are a one-person marketing team, that, they're spread across a lot of different things. Do you typically have any sort of framework or triggers for when you advise like, let's move beyond the one-page website that kind of covers everything and really start to build out feature pages or product pages, solution pages, like, because I think that's something that I get asked a fair amount, a little bit more from an SEO perspective, but like, just in general, sort of like when should I be building out dedicated pages for some of this stuff versus just having it on the homepage?
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic, like, it depends answer, and here's what I think it depends on. Well, I mean, okay, let me back up for a second. I always think that you need your homepage. I think it's helpful to have an about page that's more focused on candidates, and I think you should have that from the start, and it doesn't take that long to make if you're using a templatized site. You're just, like, reusing some of the sections from the homepage and modifying them to be about that. And the CTA there is apply for a job. But you don't need to have, like, an about page and a careers page. You just kind of, like, do the company story and like open positions all there. And then, and then obviously like you have your sign up flows and things like that. But when it comes to, do I need other product pages or other solutions pages or features pages, it really comes down to me, who are you targeting? If you are targeting one distinct audience, like your vertical solution, or you're like using one audience as sort of a wedge in, like you can get away with one homepage. But if you are speaking to multiple distinct audiences, you always want your audience to feel like that page is personalized to them and their needs. So if you can't do that for like, more than 50% of the people coming, like maybe more than 75% of the people coming to the homepage, like you're going to need to make some other pages to route them to. So that's where I often suggest like, you can have a 3-column section on your website that just basically says like, we help these kinds of teams do this thing better. And then it's like marketing and sales and rev ups. And then it leads you to other pages. And then, same thing. You can use those as early landing pages for things like ads. But then from there, like, I always think that you should be building your website in a scalable way on a tool that makes that easy, like Webflow, and you should have sections that are then reusable across other pages. So it shouldn't be too difficult to make those other pages. But yeah, if it's just you at the beginning, you might not need those. If you're targeting one audience and you have one clear product and people kind of understand what that product is. I think another key factor of like, do I need multiple pages is what kind of product this is. Is it a replacement product, or is it a situation where people aren't even necessarily problem aware and they're maybe not solution aware and they're definitely not aware of what you do? You just might need a few more pages to kind of like get everyone on the same page about, where you are. Your homepage might need to be more focused on like making that problem seem really acute. And then maybe there's a second story that's really more product specific. So it kind of depends on like how many stories do you have to tell. And if your story just becomes so genericized and dumbed down to try to fit every audience, it's probably better to like bifurcate it. I don't know if that helps, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, before we move on, anything else you wanted to touch on in terms of improving home pages and homepage conversion?
Yeah, actually, a few things. So I think, let me run through a couple of the biggest mistakes that I see. Biggest mistakes that I see are people reinventing the wheel. As an early stage startup or even a growth stage startup, start with a Webflow template or have someone build your own. But like, there's a standard site architecture. There's standard appearances for top navs. There's standard appearances for, all of these different sections, benefits sections, use case sections. Like, you can still stand out through your colors, your fonts, maybe your product screenshots. You can still stand out through all of those things. You won't look like every site, but there's no need to go crazy on designing new navs and all of that stuff. Like, it's not going to be worth it. There might be some exceptions where it makes sense to have just like a really crazy brand new design homepage if that's somehow tied to what you do. But in the vast majority of instances, follow the standard site architecture, section design, and add flair or differentiation through your words, through your illustrations, through your photography, through your screen, like whatever it may, your screenshots, whatever it might be. The other thing here that I see all the time, which is a huge mistake, is early growth stage companies copying late stage private or public companies, copying companies that are much larger than you. Like, oh, we're a fintech company. Let's copy Stripe's website. Like, here's the thing about Stripe. Everybody knows who they are. I mean, not everybody, but like, everybody in the general audience or general tech audience knows who they are and like has some sense of what they do. And they don't need to explain that up front. You, as an early stage startup, people don't know what problem you're solving. They don't know what you are. They don't know who you're for, and they don't know why you're better. And so you have to explain all of those things. And if you look to later stage startups or public companies, you're going to see more variation in how they're doing nav and how they're separating out pages. One, because they have the time and ability to get that right. And two, probably because a lot of it's like they just kept adding things to their website and it's not even doesn't even have good site architecture. So from a story perspective, a design perspective, and a site architecture perspective, you can't copy companies that are 8 stages ahead of you or even 4 stages ahead of you. Look for inspiration from companies that are in your lane. Or in your stage. So that's like a huge one. The other big mistake I see early on is just shipping your pitch deck, I call it. And that's founders have often really refined their story for investors in their pitch deck. And then I'll see their website and it's using that same story. And that story is for investors. And it tends to be more vision focused, more like long-term focused, and doesn't necessarily hit on the immediate pain of like the buyer today. And so if you're working closely with a founder, or if you are a founder, or if you're, a marketer that's taking a founder's story, be very aware of this. Don't ship your pitch deck. I see it all the time. Again, rare instances where you can ship your pitch deck. At Carta, we targeted investors for some of our products. Like, we could probably ship our pitch decks, the same audience, but it's not the same audience. It's not the same message. It's not the same level of message. And so I see that a lot too. And then the last thing I see, sorry, there's so many homepage mistakes, but a lot of them are in my
those are
post.
all great so far. Keep going.
The last one is just really janky conversion flows. So like really janky sign up forms, or like sign-up forms you can't measure because they're a pop-up, or that are just confusing, or that don't give you any context, or like way too many CTAs on the homepage. Like, you need to make a crisp and clear flow that explains why you're better for people to walk through. You can use lead enrichment tools, Clearbit, etc., and like Chili Piper to route leads to the right place. Like, there's all of these tools available to just have a simple experience that doesn't have 95,000 fields. And like makes sense and has like a nice thank you after you schedule a meeting or sign up or whatever it is, that has some more context. Like pay attention to that piece. I feel like people just do their whole website and then they're like, oh, we got to make those conversion, like those inner pages. And then they never walk through the experience again because they don't have to, because they're already like signed up.
Correct.
It's just, they forget about it. So a couple of things there, and then we can move on to our other questions, Nate. As your team scales, or if it's already scaling, and maybe this is less so right now because there's not a lot of hiring happening, but one of the things I would make new hires on my team do would always be go through our entire website and tell us what's broken. Like, from copy to flows, like, give us your impression because you have fresh eyes and you haven't done it before. Go through, and that just kind of, meant that there was a certain cadence to that. Go through the onboarding flow if it's a self-serve product, like when I was at Asana. And then go through some of our most popular blog posts and see if there's ways you can improve them. So I like to, it's just like a great starter project too for anyone that comes in, to get them up to speed and to check on these things with some regularity. If you're not hiring a bunch of new people, then it's like, at least quarterly, but maybe monthly, there's something you always go back and kind of give it the once over. So don't forget about those conversion flows is my big
I think
thing
it's,
there.
I appreciate that. I think it's huge. And even, to the point where, I think a few years into my time at Sprout, we were routinely, at least once a month, testing sign up from, desktop, mobile, Chrome, Safari, because like every browser is updating constantly. You have stuff being pushed. You have global style stuff happening. Like, there's all kinds of things that happen on a regular basis. And for quite a long time, the sign-up flow, which is common, was inside of the is in the app. So you also have like part of your sign-up process is outside of marketing's domain, and it's into engineering where it can be prone to other issues. And
for PLG, like, especially, right? For like, usually if it's sales driven, like you own it as the marketing team, the sales team has some influence on it. But in a PLG product, that is why onboarding and sign up tends to be such a bad experience, because it is kind of co-owned by two teams. And whenever things are co-owned or have unclear owners or sort of gray areas or require cross-team collaboration, they usually are not given the right treatment. It's like those areas are like, it's always like, find those areas as a company where there's overlap or unclear ownership and fix those, because those are probably your weakest areas. It's also like pricing and packaging pages, and pricing and packaging in general, often a mess because it requires a ton of cross-team collaboration and like kind of gets pushed aside or forgotten about, or I don't know, gets too many people are looking at it, or whatever the problem might be. So those areas of overlap tends to be the problem between teams.
Yeah. And absolutely. And I would say the only mistake, I agree with every mistake you listed. The only one I would add, I think, is designing and testing exclusively on desktop devices.
Yes. Yes. That's,
and and like not like the leaving the mobile responsiveness to just kind of whatever is default. Versus recognizing that one, regardless, you are getting a good amount of traffic from a mobile perspective. So how it reads, how it flows, how it interacts, all that. But then also, mobile first indexing from a search perspective, like there's a lot of that from you're common to see that speed scores and everything are great on desktop and terrible on mobile, because it's just, that is not how people think. Designers design on giant monitors. Looks good, gets coded out, and yes, it's technically responsive, but nobody's taking the time to really navigate through that with fresh eyes. So I think that would be the only one I would add to what you shared.
It's the areas where you aren't sort of dog fooding your own marketing. That's more of a product term, but you're not, I'm not editing my company's website on my phone. I'm not going through the conversion flow when I look at it. So like those things tend to be forgotten about. Yeah. So you definitely have to test it on mobile and not forget about that. And sometimes even have a different conversion experience on mobile. Some people aren't going to like request a demo that way and fill out a bunch of fields. So is it better to get them to download content on mobile and then hit them that way? That's a, test you can do. Like there's things like that too, that maybe the experience needs to be different depending on what your product is and all of that.
Yes. Totally agree. Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate everything on that. And I wanted to shift over and kind of go through like final four. So not necessarily like a full like rapid fire one-word answers, but yes, just kind of like quickly move through these last four, and then we'll wrap up. So first would just be like any sort of with you or with portfolio company or anyone you're advising, like just any sort of like recent success or learning that you think would be interesting to share.
Yeah, I really like data reports of any kind as marketing content. And I like it for a lot of reasons, but I think people like those things. They like benchmarks, they like reports, they like numbers. And I also think those things are very reusable. So I often talk about when you're producing content, you want to make sure you can get mileage out of the content or reuse it in lots of different ways. So these tends to be, you can do big reports. You can call out and do a blog post on one of the stats that's in that big report. You can then put those stats on your website. But an example that I really liked recently is from a company we've invested in called Pocus. They're a product-led sales platform, showing you data of who's actually using your product, and you can then use that to sell into them. And they recently put out a product-led sales benchmark report, which is just like, here's an example. 86% of the companies in their survey offer a free trial or a freemium low-cost entry point product. 52% of sales are conducting outbound to product qualified leads. So basically they did all of this through a survey. And then they have this report, and then they're breaking out individual pieces and all of that stuff. But what's also great is they worked with partners to get this survey filled out. So of course I'm blanking on exactly who their partners were, but they worked with other companies in similar in a similar space with a similar target audience, but obviously not competitors to do this. And so that really helped get the word out to get the survey filled out. And then also they had built-in distribution partners when they did release this thing. So I think these kinds of projects can seem like huge tasks, or be like, we don't have data for this, but surveys can work really well. And surveys, when you do them with partners, work even better and have that built-in distribution. So when I think this has a lot of the things I tell people to think about when they're thinking about sort of big bet, high impact content. It's one, is there like a distribution plan sort of built in? And in this case, yes, it's the partners and it's the people who filled out the survey. Two, like, is it net new information? Does it add value? And like, yes, it does in this case. And can it be, mixed up, repurposed, chopped into pieces, put out again, and get mileage out of it. And so this has all of those elements. And then obviously, does it ladder up to your overall story and really like connect with the message you're trying to put out there? And they're trying to put out this message that product-led sales or sort of hybrid, self-serve, top-down business models are becoming the norm in B2B, and this survey is directly, showing that. So it's got all the right pieces. So that's one that really stands out to me recently.
Yep. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then for MKT1 or, again, sort of companies you're advising, companies you've been at, kind of up to you how you would like to answer this, but just, kind of your perspective on the role that content plays in the overall strategy. So obviously you just kind of talked about data being one big part of that, or sort of the data reports, but
data reports,
content overall. So, not just blog content, everything, kind of the role you think that plays.
Yeah, I mean, I think companies that I see, or companies that I at least advise or work with, that I've invested in, are getting more savvy to like templates and utilities and like lead magnets and putting out things that are impactful and not just putting out blog post after blog post. I know you all are focused on the SEO side, so in some situations you have to do blog post after blog post for that, but like what else can we put on here? How can we really add value? What are those tools? And I think that's exactly what we do at MKT1. So our newsletter, we really write like big deep dives into certain topics. Like they're not short posts, they're long posts, they're once a month, but they're really long and they really cover things in a deep way. And then for paid subscribers, we have a template or two or some asset that goes along with it. So we did a post on contractors and agencies, and then for paid subscribers, they get a list of all of our recommended contractors and agencies. Of course, 10 Speed is on that list. But it's things like that, right? And so we're following the advice that we're putting out there. And I think the other thing to learn just from what we're doing is we're not trying to cover every single content type. Like I'm not trying to write this, like, I know that our sweet spot is writing posts that mix strategy and tactics, that are deep dives on things that apply to both founders and marketers. And like, I'm sticking to what is working for us. And then adding in these templates and other things to make it, convert and things like that. So I think two things there. One, like content isn't just blog posts. Two, like, find your lane, find your story. And like, once that's working, like, make it work. So don't try to do everything that everyone else is doing. And definitely don't try to do everything that your competitor's doing, because you won't stand out. Do your thing well.
Right. Yep. Totally agree. Cool. And then, again, similarly, kind of choose the example you would want to give for this, but like how do you define or like recommend define, if it's not your company, success for marketers and the marketing team, because I think a lot of companies view success differently. Some have short-term view, some have long-term view. So I'd love kind of your perspective on just kind of how you define success.
Yeah, so I think of marketing as both a should be gold on both like short-term and long-term revenue. Like you're trying to help sales, or if it's a product-led growth motion, like trying to help get product upgrades or sales like in that quarter, in that unit of time, but like you're also trying to like prime the pump for the future. And so a lot of times when marketing is only gold on like pipeline for this quarter, like you're missing a whole piece of what marketing does, which is like sets things up for the long term. And so you have to have some goals around that as well, and whether that's just like web traffic or content views or content conversion or something like that, you have to have more than just quarterly like pipeline goals. I also think that marketers should have goals for projects and tests and things like that too. So it's just not the same as sales. Like the measurement of success cannot be the same as sales, which is just, did you hit your quota this quarter? It's, are you setting us up for long-term success in the future? Are you doing things that are helping improve full funnel, helping improve conversion rates for both sales, but also maybe for customer success for upgrades? So it's just a more like, it needs to be a more holistic and comprehensive approach to measuring success. And I think that the best marketing teams have amazing goals that aren't just KPI goals or aren't just even like conversion rate goals too, or KPI plus conversion rate goals. They're also like project specific goals and test specific goals and things like that. And so it's more complicated to measure the success of marketing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do it try to measure these things, but a lot of it is going to come down to goal setting. And I think in some ways it's kind of like measuring the success of a product team. Like eventually there are product engagement metrics, but until you get there, there's milestones that you hit and shipping things and getting some beta testers into it. And like sometimes they're building products that are going to launch next week, and sometimes they're like building the foundation for products that are going to launch in a year. And so it's much more like measuring the success of a product team than measuring the success of a sales team. And I think that's misunderstood because sales and marketing are often coupled in how you talk about them.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Awesome. And then last one is just, what's your least favorite marketing conversation that's happening on social channels right now, and why?
Oh, it can go from it might have gone from my most favorite to my least favorite as quickly as, or really, really fast. But yeah, it's just like, will AI take over content marketers' jobs? Like, some of the job will go away, like some of the more churned out pieces of content, but like net new ideas and deep thinking and things that really like aren't derivative of things that already exist, like there will be plenty of room for that, maybe even more, because everything will become so boring and formulaic. And so, I think it's kind of separates out the people that are writing good things, and will take the boring rote stuff and kind of that will kind of go away. Or maybe your first draft of really good content can come from something like this. But yeah, the whole like doomsday style of that conversation, or like people that don't even really understand the technology, like weighing in on it, is just, I think we're all getting a little tired of that. So, there'll be some other hype cycle sometime soon that will seem interesting at first and then fall into the same category. But, if you follow good content marketing practices and you're writing things that actually add value to your audience, like your job's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I think we're in full agreement. Our recent podcast episode was trying to just have a much more sane and balanced view on that. It's like it's not, it's not one end of the spectrum or the other. It's not, I think we called it the hype machine. It's definitely in that phase. So totally agree. I have a bunch of that stuff muted on Twitter and just trying to get through this wave. I
need to get more ruthless in my Twitter. I was just saying I need to get more ruthless in my Twitter muting. Maybe that'll be a goal this week. I know I mute some stuff, but like I could go more aggressive there, and I think maybe that would be helpful.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. Would love for you to just kind of quickly tell everyone about where to find the newsletter, where to follow you, kind of anywhere else they would love to connect with you. Yeah.
So newsletter is newsletter.mkt1.co. Those are all just the letters. MKT1. I guess there's a number in there too. Those are letters and numbers. Or our newsletter is also on Substack. It's just the MKT1 newsletter. And then on Twitter, personally, I'm at Emily Kramer, just my name. LinkedIn, same thing, /in/Emily Kramer. MKT1 Capital's also on Twitter at MKT1Cap. And I tend to post more on LinkedIn than Twitter, but, follow me either place. And I guess the other things I do is I also teach courses on Maven, especially for marketing leaders at early stage companies. I teach a quarterly 5-week-long cohort-based course on like kind of everything you need to know to be a well-rounded early or growth stage marketing leader. It's a lot of fun. One's going on right now. There'll probably be a new one in May. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. Great. I appreciate you coming on today. For anyone else listening, certainly can check out show notes and more information, as well as other episodes at 10speed.io/podcast. Follow and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, anywhere else that you consume podcasts. And that's it for us today. So thanks a lot, Emily. It was a great chat. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Nate, for having me. I appreciate it.